Today on the Crosshairs, we get medieval on y'all when we get down with our Hobbit bras in the Lord of the Rings War in the North. We get some totally wicked air in Dirt 3, and Dan gets his hands on the much-anticipated PlayStation phone. Today on the Crosshairs.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Crosshairs. That was a bit weird. What was happening there?
Crosspod.
Crosspod, yeah. Hello, my name is Randolph. This is Dan. We're your hosts for this week's show, and we do have a jam-packed show this week. We're looking at Dirt 3, some Lord of the Rings action, and Dan has a new phone that he's going to show us that is PlayStation related. So
that really doesn't sound that exciting, but it is an exciting phone.
It is a very exciting phone, but before we get into all of that, we're going to check in with Laura in the GameSpot newsroom to find out the latest news. Laura, fill us in.
Welcome to Crosshairs News for the week ending April 1st. Now, in a generous goodwill gesture this week, Australian Customs have announced that while they will be checking bags at Sydney Airport for illegal copies of Mortal Kombat, those that have been fined will not have to suffer for long. John Citizen from Australian Customs told GameSpot EU this week that Customs Officer will replace all confiscated versions of Mortal Kombat with the SNES version of the 1990 arcade classic Pit Fighter, not to be confused with the 2005 film starring Dominique Vandenberg. Disappointed gamers will not go home empty-handed. Now, while the strong Aussie dollar has certainly lifted some spirits in this country, Aussie gamers remain thoroughly dejected that the recent price parity has not enticed local retailers to drop the prices of some games. Following a mountain of angry letters and talk show appearances by gamers who feel they've been hard done by, local game industry experts conducted a thorough investigation of local pricing, speaking to publishers, developers and retailers across Australia. The months of exhaustive research showed that everything is in fact okay. Prices will remain exactly the same. And finally, in news this week, Aussie developer Halfbrick have made headlines this week, announcing their hotly anticipated follow-up title to Fruit Ninja on the iPhone at a recent press event at the Sydney Opera House. Halfbrick took to the stage to announce Fruit Ninja Modern Warfare, a cross-genre iPhone game that will pit factions of fruit and vegetables against one another in the grim setting of the Napoleonic Wars. The game is expected to hit consoles later this year. Moving on to news headlines this week, the 3DS launch sees pirates locked out. And finally, Gearbox president Randy Pitchford has cried on national television this week as he announced that Duke Nukem Forever will again be delayed. Although that last bit is actually true because Duke Nukem Forever is actually delayed. It's coming out in June, and Randy Pitchford didn't cry on national television, although that would have been cool too. Bye!
This week, the following titles have been rated by the Australian Classification Board. Prepare yourself to shoot colours and ride rhythms as you take on a virus in Child of Eden. Developed as a spiritual successor to his former game Rez, Tetsuya Mizuguchi returns, and this time you can play hands-free. Supported by Microsoft's Kinect hardware or playable on a controller if you prefer, reach out, grab space and save the day when it whooshes onto the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 in mid-June this year with a G rating. Not feeling so magnanimous? Indulge your darker side with the return of Cole McGrath in Infamous 2. This electrifying open-world sequel transplants the action from Empire City to New Marais, and in addition to providing plenty of single-player content, expands to provide tools for players to build and share their own levels using content found inside the game. Rated M for violence and mature themes, get ready to stick your finger in the PowerPoint when it zaps the PlayStation 3 exclusively in June this year. And finally this week, in shocking news, the latest installment in the hit My First Tea Party series, My First Tea Party Blood Orgy Edition, has limboed its way under the classification bar to earn a PG rating for mild coarse language. The game pits warrior against warrior in a bloody battle to the death over magical teacups in Teddy Bear Land. Watch out as it slices cookies and limbs on the DS and the Wii on April 1st.
Alright, welcome to our preview section where we're going to start talking actually about games. The first game this week is Lord of the Rings War in the North. Dan, you were lucky enough to see this one.
I played it too.
You played it too, so what's it about? It's obviously another Lord of the Rings game. Like, where is it set, man?
It's based on Lord of the Rings, funnily enough. You've probably seen the films, but it's aspects of the series that were never really explored. So it is about the war in the North rather than the central themes of the film and the books. Okay. So they've blown out the backstory, and it's a whole other area that you haven't experienced before. It's a party-based game, so we got to see 3 different classes. We had kind of a a ranged character, like a hunter. You had a melee mage. You could make them if you want to. They're really respecable. And you had the warrior style class as well.
And it's an action-adventure game, right?
Yep.
Okay, and you actually talked to someone a few months ago, right?
I did. During GDC, we caught up with an Australian who's working on Lord of the Rings War in the North, and we chatted all things about lore and turning it into a video game. So have a look.
War in the North is a really classic action RPG. So big focus on co-op and big focus on the sort of core pillars of the action RPG experience. So combat, loot, upgrading, and the co-op experience. The cool thing as a Lord of the Rings game is what we've been able to do, because we've got access to both the movie and the literary rights, is to create this entirely original story. So it's happening in parallel with the events of Lord of the Rings, but the entire War of the Ring is encompassing all of Middle-earth. So we're actually going and finding out what happened on the northern front of that war. We have this fellowship of these three characters that go throughout the story and are constantly playable, you know, at all points through the story as co-op, but then at various times in the story they're joined by other allies that have been referenced in the books or that are original characters in our story, and those include characters like there's Elrond's sons at various points, there's some other dwarf lords and heroes fighting alongside at other points, and there's also the great eagles, which are actually very, very integral and cool characters in our story. The mature content is a big advantage because it lets us treat the combat much more realistically and much more consistently with the violence and the horror of war as it's portrayed in the books and on the movies. Like, it's meant to be nasty stuff, and you're fighting against these, you know, very evil and powerful minions of Sauron. So it enables us to make them more threatening, more powerful, and also it's got big gameplay advantages as well. So, you know, the fact that we can have the precision of headshots in the range system, the fact that we can be severing limbs in our heroic mode, so it gives you better feedback and more mechanics to actually make the combat deeper as well.
Welcome back to Inside Industry, your premier business news network. Have you ever wondered how video game industry analysts come up with those early predictions on the cost of new hardware, or how well big software titles will sell? Today we take you inside the top secret world where mathematicians crunch the numbers.
Here's how we do it. $42!
Hey everyone, we decided to get out of the studio for this next one because we're looking at the brand new PlayStation Portable. No, it's not the NGP, it is the Xperia, or it's dubbed the PlayStation phone, right Dan?
This is the Xperia Play, yeah.
This Xperia Play. Now,
the official brand.
Now this is my first time with it. Dan, you've had a few days with this already. Like, take us through it. So it is basically a PlayStation on a phone, is that right?
It is. They've tried to scale the experience down accordingly. Apparently the design layout, the controller itself has been designed by the same guys who did the DualShock. So it's a lot like the PSP Go from a layout perspective. You've got the shoulder buttons on the back side. You've got your iconic 4 face buttons as well as a D-pad and these nifty little virtual analog sticks.
You've been playing this for the last couple of days now, I believe. How does it feel to you? Is it cramped or does it feel pretty good? Like, what's your opinion?
It feels a bit like the PSP Go. We were just looking at the specs, and it's a 4-inch screen, so the PSP Go was 3.8, so they're fairly similar in terms of space and layout. As I mentioned, it's a slider like the PSP Go was. Content is probably my biggest concern more than anything else. There's already there'll be at least one PS1 game loaded on the console, which is at this stage Crash Bandicoot, and they've said that they'll be releasing regularly, whatever that ends up being, and they'll be about $6 each, which is pretty reasonable. They're still cagey in terms of whether you'll be able to share content across devices, and whether there's talk that the NGP is going to have some form of Android integration as a PlayStation certified device, but whether you'll be able to share them across those, they were really cagey, and whether this thing's actually grunty enough to handle PS2 graphics kind of remains to be seen.
But does it look good to you so far, what you've played?
Yeah, look, the gameplay is good, and the cool thing is that developers will be able to optimize for the analog sticks. So if you're willing to pony up for one of these things and you don't want to have your fingers all over the screen, you can do it, and the players can also remap the experience so that they can do it in a custom way with the hardware controls, which feel quite good.
Now Dan, this isn't actually out yet. Has Sony said when it's coming out in this market, and have they priced it at all? Or?
They've given a vague indication that it's going to be May, June this year. No indication of pricing at all, but they have said that it's going to be available on all the major telcos with Telstra, Optus and Vodafone. If you're after a white version of exactly the same thing, that'll be Vodafone exclusive.
And that's it for the Xperia Play. Check out GameSpot for more real soon.
Stupid game, I hate this.
What's wrong?
Ever since EA and Ubisoft decided to stop printing their manuals, I can't figure out how to play their games. I mean, sure that they've put them in the game and you can pull it up through a menu, but who wants to pause the game and figure it out from there?
Well, that sucks, cuz. Well, you can always play one of Activision's games. They hate Rainforest. They print out huge manuals. Literally, it's like a phone book. Right trigger is shoot, left trigger is iron sight. According to this, you just kind of shoot at anyone who's shooting at you, so it sounds pretty easy.
Can you flick through the book and figure out how we unlock the perks, please?
Okay, now to unlock the martyrdom perk, you need to...
Laura, I really need you to figure out in the book how to unlock the perks, otherwise my KDR is going to go down, and no one wants that. Are those from the rainforest?
Okay, this show's not the same as usual. There's a couple of
No,
weird
it's
things
perfectly
going on.
normal.
I don't know, it just feels like
Perfectly normal.
Okay, alright, well let's just move on with this perfectly normal show then. Our next preview is Dirt 3. Once again, Dan the Man has actually been lucky enough to get some hands-on with this one.
Hands-on.
Okay, tell me about it. Like, obviously the third game in the Dirt series. What's happening with this one?
Yep, so this one brings it back to the rally roots. We got to see a couple of different aspects. There was Sweden, which was your traditional track, I guess you'd call it for lack of a better term. Racing, where you just go through the course. The replay mode, where you can spin back time, is back again. And the other thing we got to see was the Gymkhana stuff, which is Ken Block. Basically, he did a whole bunch of YouTube videos of him in a WRX, and he's moved on to the Ford Fiesta. A little more ladylike, I think. But it's all about an urban playground where you essentially throw a car around, doing donuts around light poles, or drifting beneath giant cement half pipes or under trucks. So it's very different to the series.
A Ford Fiesta isn't necessarily ladylike if you trick it out with some fully sick mags or something like that.
And it is tricked out.
Really?
And it's black.
Okay, and you also spoke to someone about that,
I did.
Right,
we also caught up with the development team to talk about Gymkhana and bringing back Rally to the Dirt series. Have a look.
With Dirt 3, we've really listened to what the fans wanted. So we've looked at their feedback. They wanted more rally. They wanted more variation in the stages. So we've introduced a lot more rally stages, new locations, new weather conditions, lighting and time of day. We've got a huge array of rally cars in there as well. But we haven't left our old disciplines behind. We've reintroduced rallycross. We've got Trailblazer represented with hill climb cars. We've also got Land Rush. We've refined that and brought in smaller trucks and buggies, smaller tracks that are more like motocross. And on top of that, we've brought in Gymkhana. So with Gymkhana, you can throw the car around like Ken Block in both industrial environments as well as sanctioned competition environments such as Monaco and LA Coliseum. We actually had a lot of focus on what the community wanted. We listened to what people wanted in the comments that we saw in reviews. We looked at the forums. We learnt a lot of lessons from the telemetry that we pulled from Dirt 2. And what that meant was that we were able to find out the sort of playing habits that players had. So we saw that they were using the chase camera a lot more than we'd anticipated. We're quite hardcore racing gamers here. We all use the bonnet and bumper cams, so we were surprised to find out how many people actually did use chase cam. We also looked at the difficulty that they were playing at, and a lot of players were playing at the easiest difficulty, which suggested to us that actually our game is quite hard still for the casual player to play at its core, which meant that one of the design decisions we took was to add driving assists into the game. So now newcomers to the series are going to have that sort of stability control and those factors helping them through those early stages of their gaming experience. But we hope that in time they'll want to turn those assists off and feel the game as we've made it at its very core.
Crunch time for the Nintendo 3DS in Australia this week, with the console landing in stores around the country on Thursday. Just over a dozen games will be available, with many familiar franchises like Ridge Racer and Nintendogs launching alongside the hardware later this week. One of the biggest launch titles is Super Street Fighter 4 3D Edition, bringing the successful reboot of the well-known franchise over to the dual-screen console for the first time. While the core gameplay elements remain the same, several adjustments have been made to make the game work. The biggest change, which is also the one most likely to annoy Street Fighter purists, is the one-button push for supers and special attacks. It's worth noting though that this feature can be turned off, but it means that players will be forced to wrangle with the analog nub to pull off attacks. For the full list of games out this week, check out AU's Shipping Out.
Alright guys, we're almost at the end of the show now, and as always, before we do leave, we're going to check in with community. Our first stop is with the Indie Games competition on the GameSpot AU forums. Now last week's game was Desktop Tower Defense, and it was Nicosaurus Rex who took that one out. Again, he's a dominant force. He's dominating, right? Okay, so we'll see if the others can catch up with Nicosaurus Rex with the new game, which is called Burrito Bison.
Which I want to play.
I've never heard of this, but it's immediately appealing to me. And so, if you want more details on this, do go check out the Indie Games forum on those GameSpot AU forums. In the meantime, we have another thing to talk about community, and that is Homefront. A couple of weeks ago, Dan, we met up with community to play some Homefront.
We got 120-odd Sydney-based GameSpotters, and they turned up to an unassuming-looking building that inside was decked out as a bunker, and we gave you guys hands-on time with the multiplayer for Homefront well before its release. Here's Cos chatting with some of you.
Played Homefront now, what do you think of it?
The graphics are fantastic. The landscapes look really realistic, and the multiplayer side of it, I can really see it escalating into some really massive battles.
It's a really fast, sort of quick game.
I myself was a fan of the movie Red Dawn, and for this sort of thing, it's a dream come true.
I think it's actually a really good take on the genre. It's like a mixture between COD and Battlefield.
How do you think it compares to Call of Duty and the Battlefields out there? I mean, obviously this is going to be the market that it's going up against.
Yeah, it's a very similar kind of feel. So, I mean, I play Call of Duty a lot, so getting on the console and jumping straight into it, didn't have to think too much about the control systems.
Might hold up alright, like it might bring people from like both camps since it has like features from both.
And hypothetically, if North Korea was to invade Australia tomorrow, what do you think you'd do?
I would go into my basement and get in the fetal position and just pray for tomorrow.
Surrender unconditionally. It's just going to be easier that way.
Just run out and get killed like this.
Do something, bit of Rambo or a bit of something. I wouldn't just sit down and take it.
And that's almost it. One last thing, Dan, competitions. We do give away stuff on GameSpot, and Dan will tell you what that is right now.
We couldn't leave it there.
Yeah, that's right.
We're still giving away 3 copies of Dragon Age 2 on your platform of choice, which includes a great strategy guide. They're valued at about 170 bucks each. Last chance to get in on that one. And according to the other competition that we're currently giving away, we have a $3,000 arcade machine, thanks to our friends at THQ, to help celebrate the launch of WWE All-Stars on all platforms known to man, and 3 runner-up copies on your platform of choice.
It's always been my dream to have a little man cave and have my own arcade machine in there. So if you guys don't enter, I'm totally going to steal this thing, because it looks pretty sweet.
Or we could just close it now and keep it for the
Okay, yeah, competition is closed.
You can win 1 of 3 copies, but there's no arcade machine anymore. No, you still got a chance.
And go ahead.
Head over to www.gamespot.com.au/comms where you can get your entries in.
And before I rudely interrupted Dan, all I was going to say was that is it for this week's episode of Crosshairs. We hope you guys enjoyed it, despite some of the weirdness, even though Dan thinks it's been perfectly normal.
All above board.
All above board. Okay, we'll see you guys for next week's show. Bye.
See ya.
Today on the Crosshairs.
On the cross.
And then we're gonna, I think that's a bit sensitive leading into April.
Oh, actually, that's a good point.
Actually, that's a good that's great for Easter.
Could we have
today
Jesus?
on the, yeah, Jesus.
Is that too much?
Jesus talking about Killzone 3 or something like that.